Good evening. My name is Charles Pullman, and we welcome all of you here in the shul and all of you online. We have a very interesting program tonight, one that's highly relevant and topical, and we have a really outstanding panel of people that bring a wide perspective of the anti-Semitism that we are today experiencing in our country and in the world. As a preliminary matter, I would like to thank Nishmatam for hosting this important panel tonight. I would like to also thank Stanley Siegel, who's the executive director of the show, for all the hard work that he did in putting this together. And I would also like to thank Legacy Audio and Visual, Vladimir Bakersker, who came in only a couple of days ago and made all of the audio visual possible. And we thank him, and he put in an extraordinary amount of work. I also want to thank the panelists who are sitting next to me that I'll introduce shortly. And of course, I thank all of you for taking the time from your schedule on this Sunday evening to learn more about what's happening, to have an opportunity to ask questions, and to become more aware so that you can talk about it with your friends and your acquaintances and maybe be better prepared for dealing with it. The agenda tonight is essentially, we are going to have a panel presentation. I will act as moderator. Each panelist will talk for about 15 minutes in their specific area of expertise. We will then, after they finish, have a general panel discussion on certain issues that we think are worthy of further exploration. We will have a audience question, hopefully answers, that will not be oral, they will be written. So if you have questions here in the shul, you'll need to write them down and submit it. If you have questions online, please submit it through chat. And please also know that everyone online will be on mute, and then we will have a conclusion, and we're judging for the program tonight to be about 1.5 hours. It may be a little more depending upon how things progress. At this point, I'd like to introduce the panelists. The first panelist that I'd like to introduce is David Patterson, who is sitting immediately to my left. David Patterson holds the Hillel A. Feinberg Distinguished Chair in Holocaust Studies at the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies here in Dallas at the University of Texas at Dallas, and is a senior research fellow for the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. He's a member of the executive board of the annual Scholars Conference on the Holocaust and the Churches. David lectures all over the world to all groups of audiences. He's the winner of the National Jewish Book Award. He's published more than 40 books. He's written more than 250 articles, essays, and book chapters on anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and Jewish studies. He has several most recent books. In addition, he also teaches. He's a professor. Some of his most recent are 18 Words to Sustain a Life, Holocaust, Making the Connection, Anti-Semitism and Its Metaphysical Origins, and Genealogy of Evil, Anti-Semitism from Nazism to Islamic Jihad. And that obviously is only a few of the books and articles that he's written. Sitting next to David is Hannah Siegel. Hannah is a presidential scholar at Southern Methodist University here in Dallas, and is the co-founder and president of Mustangs for Israel, which is an on-campus organization promoting, advocating, and standing up for Israel. She works for for Jewish on Campus, a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism at college campuses, where she oversees its campus representative program. In addition, she's a former Lauder Fellow with the World Jewish Congress and a current member of the Jewish Diplomatic Corps Academy. And sitting to Hannah's left is Haley Ashland. Haley is a recent graduate from the College of Business at Florida State University. She's born and raised in Tallahassee, Florida, and moved to Dallas in 2018, where she started and is a rising star with IBM today. She was involved at home in Florida with her local temple, the Tallahassee Jewish Federation, Teen Philanthropy Initiative, North American Federation for Temple Youth, also known as NIFTY, and the Union for Reform Judaism, Camp Coleman. In the fall of 2012, Haley lived in Israel for a semester, and she has also been to Israel with Birthright. She's also, where I first met her, a yoga instructor, and I met Haley several years ago in one of the classes that she was teaching. The title tonight was purposely chosen. The pre and post October 7, Anti-Semitism in the Guise of Anti-Zionism, from the campus to the community. We know a lot about, and we hear a lot about, of what's happening in the campuses, but all that's starting to bleed out into the community. And each of the panelists has their own particular perspective and expertise in the areas that we are going to cover, which will be anti-Semitism, Zionism, campus administration and professors, campus students, social media, and community workforce and social media. The last topic that I hope to be able to cover tonight, after we've learned all this, is how do you respond to the anti-Semitism today? From the children to the adults, dealing with your friends, your coworkers. It's not an easy topic. If you could please show the first slide. I would like to just set the stage that, not that one, the next. There. This picture was taken last week at Dallas City Hall. It's a menorah inside of the building, and outside was a pro-Hamas demonstration. I was at that city council meeting. The pro-Hamas demonstrators were asking the city council to draft and prepare a resolution calling for the ceasefire in Gaza. And that resolution now apparently has been drafted, presented, and may be heard in January. If anybody on this call or here in the audience wants to go to City Hall that day, let me know and I'll get back to you. The next slide that I'd like to show, and this just to state the obvious, since the one after that, since October 7th, the ADL has reported that go back, please. That anti-Semitism is up 337% just since October 7th. And that represents forms of anti-Semitism from social media, from harassment to writings, just the whole gamut. And if the ADL is reporting 337%, then we know it's much, much higher, because not every incident of anti-Semitism is being reported. So that sort of sets the stage for our discussion tonight. The first panelist that I'd like to ask to present is David Patterson. David, help us to understand, what is anti-Semitism? What is Zionism? How are they connected? And what is happening in the world that caused such an explosion after October 7th?
What is anti-Semitism and what is anti-Zionism? How are they connected? One way to approach this is to ask, what is the anti-Semite? Anti. What is this anti-Zionist? Anti. What is Zion? What does Zion signify? Zion signifies the Torah. The Torah goes forth from Zion, and the word of God from Jerusalem. The anti-Semite is anti-Jewish teaching, tradition, anti-Judaism, Alfred Rosenberg, the Nazi ideologue, said that humanity is poisoned not by Jewish blood, but by Judaism. Judaism is the contagion that has to be purified from the earth. If you want to see anti-Semitism in practice, look at Hamas. The word Hamas is all over the media, social media. Charles spoke of the pro-Hamas group outside. What are they pro anyway? Pro what? My sense is that not many people know much about Hamas. They don't know that Ahmed Yassin founded Hamas, known as Harakat Umukawama al-Islamiyah, the Islamic resistance movement, on December 9th, 1987. Hamas is an acronym. Resistance of what? They're not resisting the occupation. No. As they say, they're not resisting oppression. They're resisting the Jewish presence in the world. For the anti-Semite, the premise is not that all Jews are evil, but that all evil is Jewish. Therefore, for Hamas, there's a religious obligation to purge the earth of God's witnesses, the God of Torah's witnesses, the Jewish people. Ahmed Yassin declared that killing Israelis and killing Jews is an act of devotion to God. Hamas identifies itself as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood goes back to 1928. In their preamble, the Hamas preamble to their charter, they quote Hassan al-Banna, the founder, who said, "Israel will exist until we annihilate it." There is an imperative, a religious imperative, not a racist imperative, not an ideological imperative, like as a la Soviet Union. This is redemptive. The blood of a Jew is the ticket to paradise. If you look at the jihadists, there's Iranian jihadists. Hamas is very much tied to Iran, as I'm sure you know, you've heard, you've read. Jihadist named Muhammad Nawab Safavi. He says, "The Almighty himself taught us how to kill. So shall we not kill when it is necessary for the triumph of the faith over evil, i.e. the Jews?" He says, killing is tantamount to saying a prayer. This is what we're dealing with. It's not the Nazis, it's not the Soviets. But I would suggest that Hamas shows us what anti-Zionism and what anti-Semitism are and how they're linked. The Hamas Charter, I think we may have a slide showing a passage from Article 7 of the Charter. In there, it was held up at one of the demonstrations, holding up the Charter with the passage. There it is, from Article 7. This is from the Hadith. It's the Article 7 where it says, quoting the Hadith, it's a collection of the oral tradition of Islam, that the redemption will not come until the Muslims have killed every Jew. Even the trees and the stones will cry out, "Oh, Abdullah, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." Nature itself vomits up the Jew. Such an alien presence the Jew is. This is not about racism. Anti-Semitism is not a form of racism. Racism is a form of anti-Semitism, which I'll explain a little more briefly and shortly. Because the Jew represents such an evil, because the annihilation of the Jews is a necessary condition for the ultimate redemption of humanity, Article 15 ends by quoting another hadith saying, "I will assault and kill, assault and kill, assault and kill." Because it turns out, not just assault and kill, it's assault and rape and butcher and behead and burn alive. That's what we saw on October 7th, which is those actions are perfectly consistent with the premise that Hamas is proceeding from. If that's the premise, the actions are consistent. This is why you have celebrations in Gaza, celebrations throughout the world. Now, anti-Semitism historically always originates with the intelligentsia, whether it's the church fathers, John Chrysostom, Cyprian, Justin Martyr, Augustine, whether it's Pope Innocent III or Peter the Venerable in the Middle Ages, Martin Luther. It's the educated ones who are the ones who conceive of and propagate and promulgate anti-Semitism. In the modern period, it comes from the philosophers, the ideologues. All of the philosophers of the Enlightenment were anti-Semitic. They have to be, ideologically. Why? Because they understand human freedom to lie in human autonomy, and human autonomy means being self-legislating. I am the one who determines good and evil. I am the one who determines what's moral from my reason. Right? The Jews are a danger to that because they follow commandments from God and not from their own autonomous self-legislation. And this idea that I am the one who determines the ground of who I am from my race, class, gender pervades academia. And the thinking upon which Jewish tradition is based is antithetical to that. Jewish teaching from the Torah rejects race as a category that defines a human being. Race is central to critical race theory, which is dominant throughout academia and in society. Critical race theory lies at the heart of wokeism. They have to be anti-Semitic, or at least anti-Judaic. Jewish teaching does not accept race as a category that determines the dearness of the human. What determines the sanctity of the human being? You all know this, you read the story. We're all children of God, created in the image and likeness. Every soul emanates from God. Every soul is connected to every other soul by the connection to the source. And each of us is a child of Adam, the Hebrew word for human being, Ben Adam, child of Adam. Each of us has a single physical and a single metaphysical origin, and we are each bound to the other. Why does God begin with one and not with two? Because so that we would not say my side of the family is better than your side of the family. There's only one side. We're all connected as a family with all of the ethical obligations that come with that. We're not isolated by race, class, gender, and other accidents. Contrary to woke thinking, contrary to critical race theory, contrary to the thinking that rules the academy, contrary to postmodern thinking, the so-called postmodern premise is there is no truth. There's only narrative. We live in what many academics call a post-truth era. And if that doesn't scare you, then you don't understand it. This is why we can have the presidents of three of the leading universities, Liz McGill, Sally Kornbluth, and Claudine Gay, refuse to identify, to say, from the river to the sea is genocidal, and we will not tolerate it. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free of what? Free of the Jews. And it's not just from the river to the sea, it's from sea to shining sea. This is a global issue, just as the explosion, the firestorm of anti-Semitism is global. The calls to gas the Jews in Australia. You've read the news, you know about this. On the campuses, it comes from many sources, I'll just mention a couple of the main ones for the sake of time. Students for Justice in Palestine, which was created in 1993 at Berkeley by a guy named Hatem Bazian, who was the head of the National Muslim Student Association. He changed the name because Muslim Student Association might be off-putting to some folks. But who can be opposed to justice? I'll mention, you've heard of BDS, boycott, divest, sanction. Boycott, divest, sanction Israel for the sake of what? It's founded in 2005 by Omar Barghouti, who said the aim of the movement is not to punish Israel economically. It's the destruction of the Jewish state. SJP and BDS are tied at the hip. They're both national, international. They both have immense funding from the Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations. You've heard about Qatar, money flowing through Qatar. A lot of it's Muslim Brotherhood money. Qatar is a money laundering operation. It bleeds into society, into movements such as Black Lives Matter. I think we may have a slide showing the Hamas terrorists parasailing there on the right. That's a Black Lives Matter post in support of Hamas. You understand? You understand what the pro-Hamas crowd is pro. You understand what the anti-Semite is anti. Jew hatred is God hatred. Jew hatred is hatred of the other human being. Okay. Jew hatred is hatred of the infinite responsibility that devolves upon each of us as we come face to face with the holiness in the other human that calls out to us. The anti-Semites, the anti-Zionists would silence that outcry from the stranger and the neighbor, not just the neighbor, but the stranger. The commandment that appears most frequently in the Torah is to love, be kind to, care for the stranger 36 times. The one who's not of my race, gender, class, religion, or God forbid, not even my political party, right? So what begins on the campus bleeds into society. What begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews, because it's about a fundamental understanding of human sanctity of any human being, not just the Jew, not just the Jew. And I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Professor Patterson. That was quite sobering. We now will move in from the professorial to the actual. Hannah Siegel is a student at SMU. She's a senior. I can tell you from my relationship with her, she's quite an advocate and is unafraid. And Hannah is going to talk to us about her experiences on the campus and dealing with certain agencies at the school, and also what from her experience in the organization she's involved with, what she has learned is happening on other campuses. Hannah, please.
Thank you so much, Charles. So as Charles mentioned, I am a student at SMU. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got involved in the Jewish advocacy and what I'm starting to see now. So in May 2021, this was the conclusion of my freshman year at SMU. There was the Israel-Gaza conflict where thousands of rockets were being fired by Hamas from Gaza into Israel. I would watch as my friends would post online criticizing Israel for responding, criticizing Israel for existing, saying it wasn't even a real country. I would get messages from my friends, messages in the Presidential Scholar GroupMe. This is the group chat that president scholars at SMU are a part of, criticizing Israel, criticizing Zionists, and people who were telling me they could no longer be friends with me anymore because I supported Israel because I was a Zionist. It got even worse from there. SMU's Human Rights Program, which is the academic department at SMU that houses the human rights major and minor, posted publicly on social media a pro-Palestine protest. It was flooded with comments, many of which were Jewish students like myself who were concerned by this post, believing that it ostracized Jewish students from the program. In response, the Human Rights Program doubled down, saying our recent social media post elicited strong emotions like the Jewish students commenting. We'd like to take a moment to discuss it. They then said their posting decisions were made in light of the program's long track record of fighting against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. For context, because of their annual pilgrimage to Poland, where they take students to visit concentration camps. I had been told from professors that I would be a good human rights student, and I was seeing a program at my university, the Human Rights Program, that was taking a publicly anti-Israel stance. I felt so alone. I felt so isolated, so ostracized. This one program that's supposed to be for human rights, that's supposed to be for all students, suddenly seemed like they weren't for Jews. After that, things started to calm down a little bit. There wasn't a major conflict with Israel. I would see people posting on social media different pictures, against Israel again. Same thing. Israel's not a real country. Israel's not a real state. Jews or Zionists are colonizers. But it was really just on my Instagram feed. I could just close the app and forget about it. Things sort of took a turn. On Yom Kippur last year in 2022, my phone was off as I was observing the holiday, and I turned my phone on to get a bunch of messages from one of my close friends who was freaking out that there was a Palestine flag on campus. And they were handing out these flyers that were critical on Israel. My friend was really upset because she was fasting and we had never had any anti-Israel or pro-Palestine stuff on campus before. And so she was a little freaked out because, as we have seen nationwide, the pro-Palestine sometimes turns into anti-Semitism, or more often than sometimes. Shortly after that, I founded SMU's first ever Israel club, Mustangs for Israel, with the focus of fighting anti-Semitism and advocating for Israel on campus. I also had been meeting with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office, an office that is purposed to address bias on campus, to address diversity about issues with anti-Semitism at SMU, and they would kind of reassure me and say they were doing something, though every now and then they would kind of just stop emailing me and no longer respond. There was some other things too, like Chabad of Plano, I believe, gave an award to Dr. Halperin, who is the director of the Human Rights Program, and students criticized that Natan Sharansky was a guest speaker there. But again, everything was mostly on social media other than the emergence of this pro-Palestine club at my university. Then October 7th happened. The day after, on October 8th, I saw students sharing a protest rally to honor and uplift the Palestinian resistance. At this point, I was wondering what they were rallying or protesting for. October 7th was the largest massacre of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. Is this really a form of resistance you want to honor? And I began to pressure the school to release a statement on anti-Semitism, to condemn the attacks. And eventually we did get a statement, but it was very lacking and only said there was recent violence and they're committed to fighting anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. So shortly after that, when the October 7th attacks occurred, we were on our fall break. So the attacks occurred on the Saturday, and then we had Monday and Tuesday off. And then as president of this Israel club, I was organizing a vigil with my that my club tabled on campus. Tabling is when you have a physical table and you're in a public area at your university and people can walk by, they see your table out, they can come up, maybe grab a flyer, come talk to you. So we do this frequently at my school. We've done it without much problem in the past. Every now and then people would set a picture of our table, say the opposition's outside, but again, just a picture, just social media. So October 11th, the Wednesday right after the attacks, we were tabling outside, Israel flag in front. And before anybody even came up to the table, I was alerted that people were taking pictures of our table and saying the anti-Palestine table was outside. And eventually I had a group of 3 girls who came up to the table and they kind of pulled my friend to the side. They grabbed him and pulled him to the side and they started yelling at him because we were giving out flyers that talked about Hamas. So I went over there and I kind of pushed him away and I went and I talked to them and I tried to de-escalate the situation. I tried to listen to them. I tried to explain what Hamas was, why we were having a vigil, what was going on. And they kind of just stood there and yelled at me for maybe a good 15 or so minutes. And I didn't even realize how intense or of a confrontation it was until I had a couple of professors who were watching it and came up to me and asked if I was okay afterward. Shortly after that, there were some students who, again, took some further pictures of the table and posted online that they wanted to come flip it over. Luckily, SMU PD came and nobody got the chance to flip it over. And this wasn't the last time that it happened. Again, this was the first. I've seen it on social media. I've seen people post things, but again, I could just close my phone and ignore it. This was the first time I have ever had somebody scream in my face and tell me everything I believed was wrong. It was really upsetting. One of my close friends too, who wasn't Jewish and was at the table, was so freaked out. He didn't want to be he was worried about being associated with something like this that were making people so angry coming up to us. And then again, every time since that day, since after October 7th, we would table, we would have an issue. There was another issue where a Jewish student they thought was taking pictures of the Palestine table. We ended up tabling the same time that day across from each other. And one of the guys from the table came up and started yelling at him. And I was really worried it was going to get violent. Again, luckily we were able to de-escalate it. We had another incident where we brought a rabbi on campus to rap to felon. And I actually wasn't there that day, but when I got there, when we were almost done, I saw a group of students surrounding, yelling at him. It's gotten to the point where we can't have an event without disruption. We can't table on campus and rap to felon without disruption. And it's only since October 7th that I'm starting to see how in person and how in the face it is. And it's getting really scary. I have people who take pictures of me just walking around, or somebody who will record me sitting in a coffee shop. And it's getting to the point where it's intimidation, where people are trying to intimidate me from speaking out. And this isn't just SMU. I'm actually really lucky. What I'm telling you here today is nothing in comparison to these other campuses. For example, in Richardson at University of Texas at Dallas, they have these rocks on campus, they're spirit rocks, and students spray painted on it, Zionism equals Nazism. Students had to walk to campus and see that. There were Hillels around the country vandalized. There's been these massive protests at university campuses calling for chants for intifada, an armed, violent uprising of Palestinians, or globalizing intifada. Near NYU, there were people who chanted, "We don't want 2 states, we want all of it." At Columbia University, a student org, actually, I think it was about a week ago now, hosted an event to discuss the first major Palestinian counteroffensive, October 7th. People are celebrating Hamas's terror attacks on campus. At Cooper Union, Jewish students were locked in the library while a pro-Palestine protest was going on. And Stanford University, a professor asked Jewish students to raise their hand and identify themselves and had them separate from their stuff and said, that's what the Palestinians have to deal with. And then there's the small things too, the things you don't see on the news, the things that it's been really hard for me to describe, especially in these meetings with campus administrators, is it's the rumors that you're a Zionist, or the people who tell you they can't be friends with you because you're a Zionist, the pictures, the intimidation. And this is a really scary thing that we're seeing on college campuses. And as some of you may have seen during the congressional hearings, campus administrators are unable or unwilling to acknowledge it. And so I think that's where I can wrap up my portion for right now.
Well, thank you, Hannah. That was quite an explanation of the things that you experienced before October 7. After October 7, I admire you for standing up and in the face of that. Unfortunately, I feel this is going to get worse and don't really see it getting better. And so what we've talked about so far is what is anti-Semitism, what's Zionism, anti-Zionism, what is its basis, what is its origin. Hannah talked about what she's seeing on campuses. And a lot of the programming that we see on webinars is about campuses. But this isn't confined to the campus. When a student graduates and leaves, it doesn't automatically stop. It continues. And maybe we're at the infancy of this continuation. And Haley, who is a relatively recent graduate of the college system, is now in the workforce. And she is having to deal with it occurring in the workforce, it occurring on social media, with friends, with acquaintances. And Haley is, I would say, unafraid. She's tactful, but she's unafraid. And I think she does what 99% of us don't do. So Haley, talk to us about your experiences, what you've encountered, how you fought back,
Yeah, absolutely.
and other aspects of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate that introduction. So great to meet so many people in the audience as well. Since I'm from Florida, I haven't been able to get to know the different Jewish communities. So thanks for having me here. And thank you to my family who is on Zoom, because the majority of us are in Florida. So just to kind of help set the tone, I want to talk about really what it's like, or what it was like to be Jewish growing up, and then, you know, in the workforce before October 7th, and then what it's like post October 7th, what it's like in more so the young professional phase of life. So growing up, at least for myself, I had no fear of being Jewish. Tallahassee isn't, you know, the smallest town, but it's a pretty small Jewish population, especially compared to Dallas. So growing up, I was usually the only kid in my class who was Jewish. I graduated with 10 bar bat mitzvah students. So those 10 students were the only 10 students in Tallahassee that graduated in my bar bat mitzvah class. But, you know, it was known that I was the Jewish girl of school, and I loved it. Like, it wasn't an offensive thing. It was, I wore my Temple Israel shirt to school probably once a week. I was proud to wear anything with Israel on it. I talked about Israel. You know, you grew up singing the songs about freedom and spirit and Tikkun Olam, and you just don't realize like why we're prepared the way we are. And it's sadly what happened on October 7th. You know, I was very proud. I'm still proud, but I was publicly proud to wear these symbols. And even in the IBM office when I graduated. So the reason why I'm in Dallas, Texas today is because I moved here about 5.5 years ago to work for IBM. And because I don't have family here, well, now my sister is here, but because the majority of my family isn't here, IBM became a family to me. I have now watched my friends get married, graduated, you know, all of the things go to other companies. And through this experience, I've met people from around the world. I've had the chance to meet Palestinian friends, coworkers, you know, different traditions in life. And so it's really opened my eyes, because growing up in Tallahassee, I felt like I was very sheltered. I didn't see anti-Semitism. It was talked about. I know it was happening behind my back because I am lucky to be raised in a Jewish and a Christian household. So a lot of times, you know, my dad being a Christian father, his friends or other people, not his friends, you know, might make a comment about Judaism, not realizing he has a Jewish daughter. So it was even in the workplace, you know, for Rosh Hashanah, I would celebrate with my coworkers. I would bring in challah to the office with honey and apples, and I felt so excited to be Jewish and proud. So let me just then share with you what it's like now. So when October 7th happened, when all of the massacres happened from Hamas, we're seeing protests in the street. We're not just seeing protests in the street, we're seeing protests on social media. And the people reposting some of these hard post and anti-Semitic posts are my friends. They're my coworkers. So I want to share, if you don't mind, I'll share this. I'll speak to this first slide. So all of a sudden, I am scared to be a Jew in the workplace. I'm scared to say I'm Jewish in customer conversations and business partner conversations because of what I'm seeing be posted by my actual colleagues, or if it's not my specific colleagues, I used to work with them. So on the left, you'll see a sign. I know it's hard to read if you're in the room. If you're on Zoom, you can probably see it clear, but it's basically someone at a protest comparing KKK to anti-Semitism, or sorry, anti-Zionism. You just have, you know, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Like, this was one of my sorority sisters shared this, and she was going to protest. And in the background, I could hear from the river to the sea, or intifada, intifada. And I reached out to her and I said, hi, I hope you're doing well. I wish you, you know, I hope you're doing well in what you're doing post-college, but do you realize how offensive this is to the Jewish community and myself? Like, I don't feel comfortable, you know, being friends on social media if this is truly what you believe. And, you know, some of the people I've responded, or I've asked that too, like, do you realize that from the river to the sea is very hurtful? I've had some people say, or I've had two people say, I didn't realize, and they have taken it down or apologized. But honestly, the majority who post it say, this is what I stand for. And so I decided, and this is how I respond, right? I just decided, well, if that's truly how you feel, if you feel that Israel, you know, shouldn't be a state, or you don't support Zionism, and I'm a Zionist, then I don't feel comfortable, you know, being a friend with you on social media, and we'll have to part ways. So you'll also see in the middle, there is, I took a screenshot of this. Like, these are all publicly posted, by the way, on social media. I didn't just like take this from somebody else. This was something I saw with my own eyes. And the black and white picture you'll see, it's basically a protest in Austin asking everyone who's joining in to wear masks and to not talk to any Zionist. So Zionist, as we said earlier, is if you believe Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. So it's just very hurtful. And I just took a screenshot up here of Hitler was right, was posted over 20,000 times in the last 24 hours. Like, that is so scary. These aren't just robots, right? These are real people that are posting this. If you don't mind going to the next slide, please. So another thing that I've seen constantly is I just want to talk to, you know, anti-Semitism in the guise of anti-Zionism, which is all why we're here tonight, is I think a lot of people don't understand what Semitism is, what anti-Zionism is. And it's okay to need to take a second and go learn. Like, it's okay to grow throughout this. I don't think our Jewish friends or people are asking everybody to know everything. It's just when you see the word criminals, or, you know, you compare Zionist Jews to maybe Nazis or the Holocaust, like, there's something very wrong with that. On the left, it's something that a professor up here, David, mentioned, Jewish Voice for Peace, something I saw constantly through my friends. They would all, like, a lot of friends, especially right after October 7th happened, constantly would reshare from this Instagram. And I think they're on Facebook, they're all over the world, Jewish Voice for Peace, because in the title, it sounds peaceful, right? Jewish Voice for Peace. But this is an anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, I can't say that word today, I guess, based organization that actually post very harmful things. I mean, I took this from the page. It says Zionism. I can't even read from here, but basically it's saying that they're an anti-Zionist organization, right? So when my friends direct me to this website and tell me their beliefs is this page, it's hard for me to grasp, because this is an anti-Semitic website. On the right, you'll see, and I heard this quite a bit this year for Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah, except to the Zionist. How does that make any sense? Hanukkah is all about reclaiming the land and rededication. I'm sorry, rededication is literally what Hanukkah means, and almost every Jewish prayer is about Israel. So if you wish a happy Hanukkah to Jews and you say except for the Zionists, you are predominantly speaking to majority of Jews, right? And in this post on the right, it's a Jewish woman who's telling people they can take her virtual pottery class, but Zionists are not welcome. Okay, so it's also important. What I'm seeing is we have Jews too that are anti-Semitic against Jews. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, like, you know, this person's anti-Semitic, but Jews can be anti-Semitic towards each other the same way, you know, Blacks can be racist towards each other. And I think people sometimes forget that. So I just want to share that what this has created for myself, and I know a lot of Jewish friends that I talk to, is we're afraid to go into the office. I'm afraid to go into the office because I have coworkers who are sharing these things on a daily basis. I'm afraid to tell people I'm Jewish. You know, it comes up in conversation, you know, it's really easy. It comes up in conversation. I'm afraid to share it because I'm afraid, like, what if my business partner or my customer associates me with something and doesn't want to do business with me? These are just feelings I'm having, right? I do think that, I will say for IBM, they've done a great job protecting their employees, in my opinion. And, you know, for example, when we saw on Twitter, there were a lot of different Nazi and anti-Semitic comments, IBM pulled ads away from Twitter, or also known as X, during that movement. So I'm very thankful to be a part of that type of company, but it's just hard because not only do I, but my friends are struggling with this content. And even though we might not directly be seeing anti-Semitism in the office, and no one's walking up to me in the office, thank goodness, and saying like, you're a Jew, like ask the Jews. No one has ever done that to me, but they're posting it online for their followers in the world to see, and those are their beliefs. So I guess if you don't mind going to my third slide, and then I'm about to wrap it up here. The next slide. I just want to show this on the screen. These are some of the common language, anti-Semitic language I see through my coworkers and peers. The slide, thank you. Commonly used phrase, we've globalized the Intifada. We've talked about From the River to the Sea already, or Intifada Revolution, glory to the martyrs, death to Israel. I do have coworkers who have told me that they believe that Hamas was birthed from Israel, and that Hamas's actions will never equate to what Israel has done to their people. This has been told to me by 3 coworkers. So this is, again, very real. We're seeing it every day. And then if you just go to my last slide, the next slide, I want to end things here with a positive note before we get into the Q&A, that there, at the same time with all I've shared, there's also been a lot of advocacy, not just from my Jewish friends, but from, you know, my non-Jewish friends, from my boyfriend, from, you know, so many. And I think it's important because my friends aren't staying silent. A lot are, but a lot are not as well. So it's important that we recognize those who are not a bystander and those that speak up. And if we haven't spoken up, we need to start speaking up, because we all know what happens when we don't speak up. So I thank you for having me up here and letting me share some examples.
Thank you, Haley. David, would you have any thoughts or comments of what Hannah or Ashley, Haley have said?
Yes, and they've touched on a couple of very striking points, each of them has, and I am grateful to both of these young women who are amazingly courageous. Does it occur to anyone why a Jew should be afraid to go to class? All the Jewish students I know at UT Dallas are afraid to go to class. Those classes are over for now. Why should a Jewish woman be afraid to go to work when Israel is trying to defend itself halfway across the world? What's that? Are Russian students afraid to go to class because of what Russia is doing with Ukraine? No. You know, etc. This is not about Israel. This is about Jews, Judaism, Jewish essence. Is like I said, all evil is Jewish. The Judaism is in your blood, in your essence, as the Nazis said. If you are a Jew, you will test Judaism positive. You will test Zionism positive. You're a source of contagion. Notice the language. Zionism is racism. Jews are Nazis. Jews are colonizers. Israel is an apartheid state. None of which it's not enough to say, oh, that's not true. Each of these terms is a synonym for evil. Each one is calculated not to inform or even to persuade, but to incite. Hassan al-Banna, founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, said he learned from Hitler that the purpose of propaganda is to incite hatred. It's calculated to incite hatred and to therefore legitimize violence. To legitimize violence. Indeed, what is the moral requirement when you're faced with an apartheid state? How do you handle that? It has to be dismantled. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism morally required in many quarters, in academia and in society. You cannot be regarded as a moral person if you support the existence of the Jewish state. It's redemptive. You have no place among the redeemed if you are a Zionist. You are relegated to the damned. Okay? I think this is why we have the phenomenon of the good Jew. I'm a good Jew. I'm moral. I'm opposed to the Jewish state. I saw in 2020, there was a statement condemning Israel during the discussion of whether they should extend police instead of military authority to certain areas in the West Bank. I don't know if you remember this. Nothing ever came of it. More than 400 so-called scholars in Jewish studies programs denounced this move by Israel, not as mistaken policy, no, but as crimes against humanity perpetrated by the apartheid state. Now, you can object to what Israel is doing without invoking crimes against humanity. That's a different language altogether. It's not about policies. Many of us have problems with some of the policies of Israel. But the problems are usually, look, this is bad for the security of the state. This is bad for sustaining the Jewish state. It's not the Jewish state should be obliterated, right? So these young, brave, courageous, insightful, intelligent young women have just touched on a couple of points that run very deep and that tell us a lot about the phenomenon, about Jew hatred, about anti-Semitism, and why it's so widespread, I think.
I'd like to just add to something that what David said. The three things that Israel is being accused of is being apartheid state, committing genocide against the Palestinian people, and that it's a colonial state. Several years ago, I was in St. Louis speaking about the BDS that David mentioned, and the next morning, the organization called Jewish Voice for Peace that Haley mentioned called me out on Facebook as a racist by name, nationally, because I was speaking about Israel. Last year, Amnesty International issued a 250 plus page report on Israel only for the fact that Israel is an apartheid state. And a lot of people hold Amnesty International in high esteem. But the report specifically said that they're not using apartheid in the same meaning as South Africa. They're using apartheid just to brand the person they're accusing or the state, just like if I came up to any of you and said, you're a racist. It doesn't matter what the facts are. Now you see through one of the slides, Israel is being accused of genocide, and therefore if you're a Jew or a Zionist, which I don't think in the mind of the anti-Semite there's a difference, then you're complicit in the genocide. And then as far as being a colonial state, I have been told to my face by a PLO representative to the UN several years ago that there never was one or two Jewish temples on the Temple Mount, but you can believe what you want. We are experiencing an extreme form of propaganda. And the anti-Semitism that we're experiencing today in all of its manifestations didn't start on October 7th. It began decades ago. And the words that Israel and Zionists are being accused of have no basis in fact. And I remember that Rabbi Sachs once said in one of his books that if you want to know what your enemy is going to do to you, listen to what they accuse you doing to them. And that is exactly what's happening. I'd like to ask the panel to comment on something. I have heard from several people recently and over the years that the anti-Semitism today is emanating from the far right, from the white supremacists. So I'd like to ask the panel of whichever of you want to start. Do you agree with that statement? If so, why? If you do not agree with that statement, tell us why.
I can get us started. So there still is a persistent hatred of Jews from the far right. We saw that with the neo-Nazis at Temple Emmanuel here in Dallas a couple weeks ago. But what is getting really concerning, especially to me as a student, is the anti-Semitism that is coming from the left. I can speak to a couple examples that I've seen. For example, at the University of Vermont, there was actually a sexual assault survivor club that said in order to join the club, you had to denounce all these different forms of hatred, Islamophobia, racism, and Zionism. What we're seeing in this day and age is we are seeing Zionism being coined as the new form of like racist ideology. We're seeing that you have to give up your Zionism to be accepted into these spaces. It's this oppressor versus oppressed mentality. I don't know if any of you are familiar with like cancel culture, but the new paradigm right now is canceling people who are a Zionist, exposing people because they support Israel. And we're seeing this come from the left because Israel is seen as a colonial state, a state that is oppressing a minority group. And it's getting really concerning because you're a young student, you are progressive, and you want to do what's right, you want to rectify different issues, and you see Zionism as one of these issues. And so people who are getting involved in this ideology don't realize that this is actually opposing Jews. And I think that's what's really concerning right now, is this anti-Israel that's coming from the left that people don't realize is very anti-Semitic.
David?
Yes. The most insidious and most threatening anti-Semitism is that form which is among the intelligentsia in the academy that poses as being anti-racist and anti-Zionist, right? Nobody says I'm an anti-Semite. Many say I'm an anti-Zionist. Now, this association between Zionism and racism became official in 1975 with the passage of UN Resolution 3375, which was brought to the UN by Yakov Malik, the Soviet ambassador, although he was not the only one. This was embraced by the intelligentsia. This was, throughout the academy. Anti-Zionism is anti-racism. If you're a Zionist, you are, by definition, a racist. But it gets couched in this, in the language of moral outrage, in the language of righteous indignation, in a stance and an attitude that stinks of self-righteousness. People like Chris Baker, Andrew Anglin, whose names you probably don't know, who are white supremacists, they're proud of being anti-Semites. On the left, they deny it. Okay, at least from the right, you know what you're dealing with. But I can guarantee you, Liz McGill, Sally Kornbluth, and Claudine Gay do not identify as white supremacists or far right. Very few in any university will say, I'm a white supremacist. Right? And if you look at the political parties in Congress, from which side of the aisle does most of the anti-Semitic discourse originate? The squad, right? That's where it's coming from. And also, just one more thing, just beware of those who would say Islamophobia is the same as anti-Semitism. They're both problems, right? They're not, Islamophobia may be a problem, but it's not the same as anti-Semitism, as I have suggested. Right? Anti-Semitism is not about race. It's not about ethnicity. It's not about color. When the critical race theorists tell us that all Jews are white, they're not talking about color. They know that Jews come in all colors. White means privileged. White means the oppressor. White means colonialist. White means Torah. White means God of Abraham. Those are all white from the standpoint of critical race theory. So the far right, I wish more would be as open and honest as the far right.
Let me mention that if you have any questions for those of you here in the shul, raise your hand. You'll be given a piece of paper. You can write it down, and Olivia, the young woman in the back, will come by and pick it up. And at home, you can send it to us by chat. Before I ask the first question, I want to ask a question of the panel, and both from the elder point of view and from the younger point of view. Anti-Semitism has been growing over the years. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. Where have our Jewish institutions been? Is it a failure of educating the Jewish population to be proud as a Jew, or to understand the history of Israel or its connection? How do you explain a Jewish person who went to Jewish camp, went through Jewish schools, now turning against Israel and promoting the propaganda of Jewish Voice for Peace? There's another one, If Not Now. There's several that are organizations maybe led by Jews. I don't call them Jewish organizations. David, from your perspective, and then from the two young ladies with us, where has our educational system been in the Jewish world?
That's a good question. Question runs deep. As you started pointing with, by pointing out anti-Semitism is rising, it's the manifestation of it is rising. I think it's surfacing, but I think it has been beneath the surface forever. And I mentioned the insidious nature of left-wing anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, in as much as it plays on the desire of any human to be good. Certainly the young, undergraduate, college students, idealistic, searching for meaning, mission, direction. They want to be good. They want justice. They want peace, right? And not just the young. Jews want to be thought of as good Jews. This is the plague of modernity. Since the emancipation, so-called, of the Jews, perhaps that Jews were not allowed into universities in any significant numbers till the middle of the 19th century, right? In Europe, in Europe, where most Jews lived. And they wanted a seat at the table. They were invited to assimilate as long as they checked their Judaism at the door. There's a similar phenomenon in the workplace, in the school, in the academy. You can be one of us. You can be one of the good guys if you check your Zionism and I would say Judaism at the door. They're connected. This is why people laying tefillin get attacked, right? This is it's about Judaism, Jewish teaching, Jewish tradition. So Jews get seduced by this like anybody else. I want a seat at the table. I don't want to be afraid to go to work or to class. I'm one of the good ones. It's not me. It's not me. But at what price? What are you trading your Torah for if you are Jewish? Whatever it is, you're being overcharged. You're being overcharged. If we are, those of us who are Jewish, in response to this growing manifestation of anti-Semitism, should be even more Jewish. I have a couple of students who started wearing kippot and tzitzis out on the campus. Here I am, hineni, here I am. Be Jewish, rejoice in your Judaism, don't apologize for your Judaism, and let's not stand idly by the blood of our brothers.
Hannah or Haley, would you like to comment on that?
I will comment on it. I would say, and it's not something I thought about until actually a conversation with Charles recently, but when you think, or the reason why I think there's a gap there is because I do think the education system, not every education system, right, but a lot of the education has failed to teach Jews like myself, like what's next, right? The Holocaust happened. You go to even the Holocaust Museum in Dallas, Charles, we were talking about this. It's like the whole museum, it does a great job of showing what happened in the Holocaust. But then what happened to the Jewish people next? Like we're taught, I think I can remember, of course, being Jewish, you learn this, throughout your life, but actually in public school, I want to say we talked about it definitely in middle school, definitely had a longer class on it in high school. And again, it's like, okay, Holocaust happens. This is what happened. And then Israel, 1948, Israel is a state. Like that's it. You don't talk about how do we live in peace. You talk a little bit about the Oslo Accords, here and there you might see something, but I think that's the gap. So when I see, friends sharing and comparing the IDF to Nazis, they think, they constantly to me are like, well, you learned about the Holocaust. The IDF is doing exactly to the Palestinians what Hitler did to the Jews. And that's constantly something that Jews are compared to. And so again, I think that there's a lack in the education, in the public school education, maybe private school too, but I'll just speak to I grew up in the public school and then Florida State University. So I would say that's just my gap there.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I can elaborate a little more too. I definitely agree with you. And I think there's a problem with education. And I think a lot of this stems from the fact that anti-Semitism is ever changing and constantly morphing. So historically, we saw anti-Semitism in the form of religious hatred for killing Jesus or, being an inferior race during Nazism. And in today's day and age, we're seeing anti-Semitism as Zionism. And it's more difficult for people to identify it. We don't have that hindsight like we do with history to say that is objectively wrong. People think that anti-Semitism is just neo-Nazis and just thinking Jews are an inferior race. And it becomes really difficult to explain to people that that's not entirely what it is anymore. Like we mentioned, it's a problem, but it's not the major problem. So I think this is the most difficult issue and the most troubling thing that is going on within our education is that people don't know what anti-Semitism is. For example, when I speak to school administrators, when something mentions Nazism, the school is really good in saying, yeah, that's wrong. But when it says Zionist or Israel, they don't understand. And I think even some Jews don't realize that things are anti-Semitic. And so I think what we need to do is we need to start educating ourselves and we need to start realizing that anti-Semitism now is not like it was historically and that there is this new paradigm in what anti-Semitism is as anti-Zionism.
So on that, and then I'll read some questions. Hannah, and we've talked about what is anti-Semitism. Several years ago, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, called the IRA, issued a non-binding definition of anti-Semitism. And there's a statement, and then there's examples. David, do you think that definition, and same for Hannah and Haley, would be helpful in trying to explain what anti-Semitism is to someone, who sort of like, how do you explain it while standing on one foot?
Anti-Semitism is telling lies about the Jews.
Well, that's simple.
1 foot. I think the IRA definition is a good working definition, and they call it a working definition. It gives us something to talk about. They do state clearly that criticism of the policies of the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. That's part of their statement. But demonizing the Jews is anti-Semitic, whether it's the Jewish state or the Jewish people. And then they have 11 examples. So I think it's a good place to start a discussion. Now, I'm doing a graduate seminar on anti-Semitism next semester, and I just hope by the end of the semester, my students have some notion of what anti-Semitism might be.
So I'm going to read one of the questions we got. What is needed for those university leadership to acknowledge this hateful Jewish speech? There's a federal statute, it's called Title VI, that its reach was extended by Trump during his administration. I'm starting to see nonprofit legal organizations starting to file lawsuits against universities. It is basically Title VI is enacted. It's a federal statute to protect certain designated minorities. Trump specifically extended that to the Jewish people, and the universities need to enforce it so the Jews feel safe. We've seen it at some of the Eastern schools where major donors have said, I'm not going to give you my $100 million. I suggested to my wife, Janine, that we send such a letter, but unfortunately it wouldn't have the same impact. I think making calls if you're alumni being organized, trying to, and the pressure that needs to be put up organized. And I say that with emphasis because last Wednesday when I was at Dallas City Hall, the Palestinians filled the chamber. They did three things that I found to be disrespectful. One, when the meeting didn't start on time, they started shouting from the audience at the staff, why are you not starting the meeting? Do your job, you're wasting our time. The meeting started and the mayor called upon a minister to give a give a prayer, and the people in the audience started coughing until an older woman sitting in the very first row got up, turned to the people and wagged her finger, and they stopped. They are organized. And then the third thing that happened was the mayor, after that passed, said, let's rise to the pledge, and they all stayed seated. That's who was there, and that's who was in the streets. Another comment was, part of the problem is having educated Jews say we are occupiers. Please comment. Yes. When you have organizations that claim they're Jewish, like Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, and in my opinion, to a large extent, an organization called J Street, whose emails I get, are taking a harsh position towards Israel. It weakens Israel's position and it puts all of us in danger. Because the non-Jews, not the non-Jews, the anti-Semites, the non-Jewish anti-Semites will then look to say, why are you upset? Even your own people are saying Israel's an apartheid state. I've had plenty of Jews tell me that. There's another question, and David, maybe you can answer it in a short way. How much of the Hamas charter is from the Quran?
Good question. There are, I believe, 32 articles in the charter, and the charter makes many claims about the Jews, compares the Jews to Nazis in the charter, among other things. But the Hamas charter, which is called the Charter of Allah, suggesting that Hamas is Allah. Anti-Semitism is about usurping or appropriating God, becoming God, among other things. They invoke three holy texts, three kinds of holy texts. One is the Quran, and they quote the Quran very frequently. The other source, as I mentioned earlier, is the Hadith. It's a collection of writings from the oral tradition of Islam. And the third holy word, holy text that they will quote to demonstrate the truth of their claims is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The infamous fake forgery published in Russia in 1903, which is supposedly notes taken in a secret meeting of the world Jewish leaders plotting to take over the world. It's the world Jewish conspiracy. The Jews control the banks, entertainment, media, government. It's Hitler's wire pullers. If you know Nazi propaganda, you know this image of a puppeteer from Der Stürmer. Hitler got that from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which he quotes in Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, published in 1924. So Hamas charter is interlaced with passages from the Quran, from the Hadith, and the Protocols. Now the Quran, just say one more thing about Quran, since the question is about Quran. Like many religious texts, you can use the Quran to justify just about any agenda you want to justify. I mean, the Quran also says Israel belongs to the Jews. right? What do they do with that? Of course, it's ignored. But you have to, you can't take over God. You can't usurp God and the throne of divine judgment without also appropriating the holy word, the word of truth. And that's what's happening with the charter of Allah.
You want to say something? Say something.
I just wanted to go back to the question on the universities too. Charles mentioned Title VI. Title VI, as he mentioned, is a way to hold universities accountable. But I think what's also significant is what people can do to prevent the universities from needing legal action to getting to Title VI. So in my conversations with university administrators, one of the things I've tried to convey with them is that a lot of the things that start off as speech eventually turn violent. As I mentioned, people get so angry at us that sometimes they threaten to do things like flip over our table. We also had an instance where somebody came over, started yelling at us and flicking a lighter. There's a point where this speech transitions into actual violence, and universities need to understand that and prevent it from getting to that point of violence, prevent it from getting to that point of Title VI.
All right. Well, all right. So here's the question. In the universities, is anti-Semitism prevalent among the different departments at the same rates, or is it found primarily in certain departments? And if so, which ones?
Go ahead.
So at SMU, like speaking to that personally, the only department I've really seen it is from human rights program students. I do think, though, if we look at other universities, it's a lot more institutionalized. For example, you can look up lengthy faculty lists of academic boycotters, faculty lists for boycotters of Israel, BDS, and you can actually look these up at universities and see that sometimes it is whole departments like a school's English department, but it really just does vary depending on the school.
Okay. David, do you have a comment?
Yes, if you look at the academic professional associations who are pro-BDS and anti-Zionist, they're all humanities, social sciences, ethnic studies, cultural studies, women's studies. More than 130 women's studies programs signed a statement saying the Palestinian cause is the feminist cause. You find it's very rare to find such statements from the associations of physicists, chemists, biologists, and so on. Unlike those of us in the humanities, and to some extent social sciences, they actually deal with facts, hard reality, right? But they're not totally immune. They're not totally immune.
Quickly, we're running a little short. There's a question. Do you believe social media has heavily impacted the current anti-Zionist viewpoints?
Yes. That's a simple question. Yes, it is. I'm seeing it every day. If I could let it consume my life, which I did in October, I was glued to my phone. I think I saw a post almost every hour, and this isn't on just the news. Like this is just from people posting what they think is the right thing to share. A lot of bandwagoning comments or posts. A quick reshare on, again, what Jews in Israel are doing. It's hard to even put into words. I think seeing some of your friends who you stood with when you like growing up, you stand for, of course, like during the Black Lives Matter, I stood with friends, and during LGBTQ, I stand with my friends who, I stand with my friends for their rights. And then when something like this happens to Israel, I think you see on social media a lot of people posting against anti-Zionism because they think that it's the right thing to do.
Hannah, you want to comment?
Yeah, I can comment on that briefly. Like you mentioned, bandwagoning. the thing with social media is that it's kind of keeping up with trends, doing what's popular. And right now, what's popular on social media is being anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. And it's so easy to just see a post and click reshare. And then people don't fact check things. People don't realize that what they're seeing may be spreading misinformation. And the more you see it, the more you tend to believe it. So I think people tend to see such a flux of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, pro-Palestine posts on their social media, and they start to think this is a popular opinion, this is a trend I need to hop on, and then they start to have these beliefs themselves.
I want to make one more comment. That was a great addition. A lot of times what gets reposted, so for those who aren't as familiar with social media, you can reshare. Like you don't come up with the post itself. You see a post, same thing on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and you press the reshare button. And sometimes people just see the picture and they're like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Look what's happening. Reshare it. And they don't sometimes, I mean, a lot of people are guilty of doing this. It's okay. It's happened. They don't fully read the caption, and the caption underneath is like, Jews XYZ, or Israel is committing a genocide, or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the below, not the comments from other people, like in the actual caption of the photo. And so a lot of times that's kind of where I've had to respond to friends and just say, hey, I agree with that picture you shared, or that quote you shared, trying to show, XYZ is wrong. But do you realize what else you're agreeing with when you reshare that picture?
So in wrapping up, I just want to share with you an observation. We know what happened on October 7th. On October 8th, the not yet. That's a slide, but I'll get to it. On October 8th, what I call the pro-Hamas demonstrations started. That wasn't coincidental. I want to share with you a post, even sometimes I read social media, but not often, by an Israeli named Noah Tishby. Noah Tishby is an Israeli. She's very popular. She writes. She just came out with a book recently about Israel, sort of a easier presentation of the history and the salient points to know. And I just want to read you what she wrote. It is now beyond clear that anti-Semitism on campuses is systematic and widespread. What we're witnessing on campuses and in our cities isn't a grassroots movement, but a highly orchestrated effort led by professional organizations like American Muslims for Palestine, or AMP, and their brainchild organization, Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. Some of the individuals running these groups have previously worked for organizations linked to Hamas and terrorism, such as the Holy Land Foundation, which was investigated and part of a criminal trial in Dallas probably 20 years ago, Kind Hearts, and Islamic Association for Palestine. We don't have enough time tonight. It'd be another interesting to discuss where's the funding coming from, because it's coming. When they show up with large flags and all these other things, it's not just by coincidence, it's orchestrated. And as I told a Christian group that I spoke to recently, and has been said, this is not just about the Jews. And if you read the Hamas charter carefully, you will see that other religious groups are also targeted. It's just we Jews take the first position. And if you saw in the last couple of days, Denmark and Germany have uncovered and stopped a Hamas terrorist attack. We don't know who's crossed into this country at the border. It is being reported that Iran, who's behind it all, with probably Qatar, orchestrated October 7th, and it was the planning for over a year. We see what's happened in Denmark and Germany. It's not by coincidence, and it's not probably a lone cell. And if you think about us and what's happened over the last several years, what occurs here occurs in Europe first. Like several years ago, there were a mass movement of people into Europe and they let them in. Now they're starting to say that wasn't a good idea. And now look what's happened on our border. This is going to be a long war. And I'm not necessarily talking about Gaza. I know there's a lot more we could talk about. For those of you here in the shul and all the many of you on social media, on Zoom, silence is not acceptable. If you're in a setting and someone says lies, they're anti-Semite because of what David said. Very simple. They're telling lies. At a minimum, I ask, just look at them and say, I don't believe you're correct. You don't have to be an expert to say that. You don't have to defend it and don't get in an argument. And if you want to take it a step further, turn it around and say, I don't think you're correct. What are you relying on? Make them defend their position. It's what we sort of do in the law. I'm a lawyer. Don't get in an argument. You're not going to win it. And if you think that they're so far to the left, don't even, I mean, you know, you have to decide how you're going to use your resources. But silence is not acceptable. As Americans, we can't remain silent. Rabbi Sachs, and then I'll conclude, said that optimism is the belief that things will get better. That means we just sit in our chair and wait. Hope, he said, is the knowledge that if we work together, we will make it better. That's where we are today. We have to work together. We have to pay attention to what's happening, as distasteful as it is and as disruptive to your sleep. If you have insomnia, it will get worse. But that's where we are today. I want to thank Danny Haley for all of her excellent work in making this happen. I appreciate everyone here tonight and everyone on Zoom for taking the time to listen to these disturbing facts, and they're facts. Maybe we'll meet again. Maybe we'll have another one of the panels. I would like to personally thank David and Hannah and Haley for the preparation they gave to tonight and to the excellent job that they all did. And I appreciate it. And I will just conclude by saying Laila Tov.